So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Political No Brainer, the podcast where we move past winner takes all politics, and it's a real conversation. Um, I'm glad to be joined with Dr. Owen Anderson, intellectually known scholar, professor, theologian, pastor, and a jujitsu instructor. I find that interesting.
Yeah.
That's a definitely interesting part of it all. And so the first thing I want to jump in is the intersection of religion and public life. I think we're really in the cusp of that now, and that's just fine with me. I do think there's some checks and balances when it comes to that, but we're definitely in it. So let's get into
Mhm.
it. How
Yeah.
is the intersection between just basically religion and public life? How are we going about it? Are we going about it in a way that's the correct way to go about it? Are we jumping into it too fast? Because we haven't had it still till just recently.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking to me today. And what you're doing is a good example of the need for public discussions, right? So this is the kind of thing that we should encourage people to do, and we should model behavior of talking about big topics. And I think that's what religion is, right? Religion, whatever your religion, it answers the big questions for you in life. It answers the questions about what's eternal, what's your purpose, how do you find meaning, how should you live. And so we have a hard time publicly talking about those things when we have strong emotional disagreements. And yet our religions guide everything we do because of these answers that we give to these questions. So I think that we need to revive public discourse that can be both rational and also about important topics. So right now we have it where public discourse, if by that you simply mean what's going on in the public, like social media, it's not rational. It's usually just emotional shots at each other. It's very tribal. People have their sides. They have their favorite team they pick, and then they take shots at the other side. And so you don't really get rational arguments about why someone thinks this view instead of that view. But then it's also not very religious, meaning we keep those topics out, especially in actual politics. As you said, up until just recently, we don't bring that up except for maybe a few generic phrases. It's interesting, for example, that Bill Clinton and Carter both said this is a Christian nation. So two Democrats, but that's all. They just say a generic phrase like that and move on. And that's about the most you get. Whereas now we have the rumblings of doing a lot more with religion in public life. Now, in my professional life, I'm a professor at Arizona State University, and one of my fields is the First Amendment and religious liberty. So if you look me up on Amazon, you'll see I have a book, The Cambridge Companion to the First Amendment and Religious Liberty. And that's the question that's on everyone's mind when this comes up is, well, wait a minute, you can't talk about religion in politics because of the First Amendment. So it's important that we clarify what the First Amendment's about, because you asked what's the correct way. And so, since we're in the United States, the quote unquote correct way would be the way that's consistent with the First Amendment. And the First Amendment gives us the freedoms of speech and the press and assembly and the right to petition the government and the freedoms of religion, both that there is not an established religion. There's no Church of America, like there's a Church of England or a Church of Rome, but also the freedom to worship without government interference. So with religion, especially, it goes both ways. The government doesn't establish a religion, but it also doesn't interfere with your worship. And that comes out of a time where Christians were fighting with each other about what to do in worship. So this wasn't really a comment on the world's religions. It was a comment on different Christian denominations and what they disagree about. So what I'll point out here, and then I'd like to hear your follow-up question. Politicians are also covered by the First Amendment, meaning a politician is also free to have a religion. And a politician, even one who's officially elected and installed in office, can say to people, I'm the president, and I really hope you go to a church on Sunday. I go to church, I get a lot out of it. It's really good for my family. I hope you go also. Saying that does not violate the First Amendment because it doesn't make anybody go to church. You're still free to say, no way, I'm not going to church. But that introduces religion into the public life. And we've had a kind of taboo on that for quite some time. I might even go back to Reagan, interestingly, because Reagan didn't attend church while he's a president, although he would call himself a Christian. And a reporter asked him, why don't you go to church? And Reagan said, well, I don't think the president should pick a specific church over others. I have to be the president of everybody. And so a conservative president is the one who introduced this idea that to be neutral, you have to be not religious.
So that is an incredible question. So I'll say this: if I were president and I felt the need to go to church, it would be a Catholic church, and I would be proud to say I'm a Catholic. And I grew up Jewish, but I am very much proud to be a Catholic,
Yeah.
and that's my choice. And I would never relinquish that opinion
Yeah.
just because, and I say that not
Mhm.
knocking the presidency, but because I was the president. So
Right.
no one, and I do think, like you said, actually COVID I believe, is the reason we are at this quagmire, if you will. There was essentially liberals saying you can't worship because of the chance of spreading this disease.
Yeah.
And then there was a very specific president, we're not just throwing his name
Mhm.
out there, Donald Trump, who said, go ahead and worship. And
Yeah.
I think that's where the battle lines were drawn.
That was a yeah.
And yeah, and I really think that was on that day, maybe. Maybe it was a specific day. I can't name the day, but I do think there was that standoff
Yeah.
between the two parties. And essentially again, I've said so many times, I'm not particularly a fan or not a fan of Donald Trump, but he is the guy that swings the bat harder than any other politician ever has. And he's kind of the Reggie Jackson of baseball. He hits a lot of strikes, but he hits a lot of home runs. And that was a home run in his own way.
Yeah.
He's definitely said, if you choose to go worship, go be with
Yeah.
your um people and worship. Jackson LaHamar, in his interview, he did say there was sort of on the liberal side an attack on Christianity via
Mhm.
tax laws and stuff like that. Donald Trump has now addressed that with his office with an office he created in the White House to address that issue of singling out
Yeah.
potentially Christian pastors for tax evasion when in fact
Yeah.
it's not really tax evasion. So we are at that precipice,
Mhm.
and and there's been neither side has relinquished an inch. Is there a time
Mhm.
where, and I say that simply because they haven't. Neither
Yeah.
side has given an inch on the topic.
Yeah.
Is there a way to just come to some agreement on this?
Well, that's a good question, and I like your point about if you were president, you'd still go to church because what you're pointing out is you're also a human, and you have a soul. Your soul was you had a soul before you're president, while you're president, after you're president. You have to think about the condition of your own soul yourself. And so by saying I'm not going to go to church for 4 or 8 years, well, what about you, President Reagan? What about your relationship to God? You can't put that on hold for 4 to 8 years. That harms you. So I think it's important to point that out as well. That yeah, go to a church and you can explain, hey, in your case, I go to a Catholic church, and here's what I like about it. And I hope you find a church also to go to, American people. It's good for you. But I think you're right that was a very important moment and illustrates that there are some things we can compromise on, but there are also some things that we can't. And a lot of time is spent on arguing about that first group of where the compromise line will be drawn. For example, this recent government shutdown, right? Where will it be drawn? Who's going to, budge an inch? But that's a compromise situation. There's not exactly 100% this or that, but there are some things where either you go to church or you don't go to church during COVID. And so that's a line drawn that forces a public debate. And those are kind of the monumental turning ones because the compromise ones, they come and go all the time. But the ones that there's really no middle ground, there's no gray area between them, those force a change. And I think you're right that was kind of an uprising of, I don't know, the conservative religious people. Largely that's Christian, but it could also be Jewish, could be Muslims that want to go to
A
on
mosque,
Friday, right?
right?
Go to mosque on Friday. So people say, no, this is more important to me than government. And I also maybe don't believe what the government's saying about if this is easily spread that way or it can be protected with masks. So that raised a whole conflict then between religion and government, which we haven't maybe seen for a while. Now that's not surprising, and the American experiment is an attempt to solve that problem, right? So we come out of a setting where the Europeans were fighting bloody fights nonstop over this kind of stuff. And so, in one way, the modern world is simply an answer to saying we're going to provide a government that has the most protections for the biggest group of people so they can do what they believe is the best without settling the matter for them. And I think we had the right solution. Europe kind of followed us and they have some solutions, but we see some weird stuff coming out of the UK right now about no freedom of speech. You can't critique religions online, you're going to get arrested. And so we have the protection of that. As long as we have the First Amendment and courts that obey the First Amendment, that won't happen here. And therefore, what I'm suggesting is not that we change the First Amendment and we start requiring people to go to church, but that it's okay for politicians to give a case for why they think that's good. And we need to get out of this time period where we think the public square means essentially atheism. Don't bring it up. Don't talk about church. If you go, fine, but you stay silent on that. We need to bring back some rigorous debates about that. Why not have that as an important part of presidential debates? Now you have to debate your view of church attendance also, not just economics.
Well, absolutely. And I've actually, when we let's call it church attendance, I've actually said with Jackson Lahamar, we actually came to a sort of understanding. Churches is one of the most underutilized buildings in America. They're generally used on
Right. Yep.
Sundays and Wednesdays. And I
Yep.
said, okay, let's go way out in left field here. We're in a crisis in America. We're in a mental health crisis and a living skills crisis. And generally, the two work hand in hand. People are having
Mm-hmm.
trouble succeeding, and that's causing their mental health to decline. And I've said, can we use the churches to
Yeah.
give people life skills? Can we congregate in those churches? And
Mm-hmm.
if it even is agnostic, it doesn't have to be Christian literature that teaches you
Mm-hmm.
how to invest or teaches you how to budget or
Yeah.
teaches you how to buy a home
Yep.
and so many other things. I've suggested we build 4-year academies for kids leaving foster care because they're thrown out into
Mm-hmm.
this crazy world
Yeah.
at the age
Yeah.
of 18 with no hope of
Yeah.
succeeding.
Yep.
So, and that would open the doors. But and then what people say, well, why the Christian church? Well, I'm just saying the Catholic
Yeah. Whoever
churches,
it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
whoever, do it in a temple too. Is there would you say politicians should discuss that and have to discuss the
Mm-hmm.
funding for it too from a federal
Yeah.
budget or a local budget?
Yeah. No. I think the truth is that Christians already have been doing that. It might be the limitations on the resources. So, for example, over the centuries, it was the Christians who started orphanages, started welfare resources, started retirement homes, started hospitals. And so you'll see in most cities, churches are still named St. Mary's or First Presbyterian. They're still named after the religion that built them. So I think what you're saying is let's return to doing what has been happening already by Christians
In a
who are the
bigger
ones who
way.
recognize this. But think about what do we have now? Let's assess what we have now. Who does what you're saying? Well, maybe a few high school classes. They might have like a one class on but they used to have home economics, right? Now they might have one class on budget at the most. But the big one, who I think steps into the hole you're noticing, is the universities. But here's the difference. To go to those, I'm going to start at the lowest level at a state university like Arizona State that wants to be affordable. You're paying 16 grand a year. So you're saying to the foster kid who just came out, who's 18, just came out, yes, go into debt, 16 grand a year to learn the life skills that will let you lead a life so that at the end of 4 years, you're in debt, well, whatever it is, 60 grand. But now you know how to get a home mortgage, which you can't afford, and no bank would lend to you. But what do churches charge you to attend? Zero. Now they have tithing, they have offerings, but there's almost I've never seen a church, even for these kind of public programs, have a fee at the door that says to the 18-year-old foster kid, "Hey, you're gonna have to pay $50 to hear tonight from whoever it is about budgets." Who's Dave Ramsey? Right, you got Dave Ramsey coming in. You're gonna hear from him about how to do a budget, but it costs you $50. No, those are always public facing, and offered for free as a ministry. So I think you're right. And there are some big churches, well called mega churches. Here in Phoenix, we have Christ Church of the Valley, and it's like a university campus. It's huge. And so it has a whole community center for sports. All the homeschooling families go there because they have a great field for soccer, football, basketball. So through the week, when you drive past CCV's campus, there's a line of cars coming and going the whole week. So I think they've tapped into the model you're suggesting.
And when we say tapped in, that's my thing is I love the idea that they've tapped in, but how do we do it in a bigger way?
Yeah.
Because there's still a lot of children out there, and I just put it out there just like it is. There's a lot of children out there who get timed out at 18,
Yeah.
simply put, and realize the only thing they have to exchange over and above their older competition is themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they either turn to a life of crime or turn to a life of sex trafficking. How do we mitigate that in a way that the churches get so involved, like you said, these giant sports fields, or if this 18-year-old has a child, can she come to this church and
Yeah.
have a meal, a hot
Yeah.
meal,
Yep.
and maybe even coordinate with somebody to have a place to stay that night, or
Yep.
even, I mean, and that's where I think there should be an intersection between government and church because and funding for it.
Yeah. Well, I know the funding model. the generic idea that you're suggesting that's true, but the details of the funding model will worry some people on the charity side, because as soon as the government says, hey, we're going to give you X amount of money a year, now you're under control because the money is attached to something. And if you build a program that's dependent on that, and you got 100 people in the program, and the next year they say, hey, we're going to pull the funding unless you also do this, you're kind of stuck. So there's always
Right.
worries about like government. No money's free. Every all money has a string attached. But apart from that, the general idea that government should be proposing these things, and I believe that Trump has said something like this before, that he wants to see the social work done that's done by impersonal government agencies done more by churches.
Right, and that's the kind of thing I'm looking at, even not just the one particular president or the one particular
Yeah.
candidate, a big hard swing out there that a lot of politicians start thinking about this. Because what we've gotten so far for the longest time is the same old nonsense, just recycled or
Mm-hmm.
redelivered in a different way by different politicians. But this is great. And like you said, I just think there is a connection between our life and the churches.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to make that connection clear in a big way. But and
Let me add one thing. Add one thing real quick is which because you're focusing on very important social needs, and I agree that's true. But one additional thing, what I started with religion was that the religions answer our big questions. And so when I'm hearing at ASU, when I'm sitting through meetings, what I'm hearing is student statistics about depression and anxiety are off the chart. It's like a growth, exponential growth up. Students are reporting they're depressed, they're anxious, they're having gender dysphoria, which leads into a whole bunch of debates about LGBTQ plus sex philosophies at school. And so religion also addresses those things, because you might have a warm meal, but your life doesn't make any sense. Whereas government doesn't, it's not really set up to answer those questions. And when it tries to, you get weird kind of almost communist vibes from their answers. But that's exactly what religion's for.
Right. And how do we get to that point where we have more? Because you're talking just like me. When I look at some of the local high schools, we have a high rate of suicide in high schools. So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
a lot of it's not even reported. So it
Mm-hmm.
looks like the rate's not so high, but it's significantly high.
Yep.
And even one child is too high.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's just like you said, it's based on anxiety. It's based on a lot of circumstances in their life that possibly religion could answer those difficult
Yeah.
questions. But the point is, the question is how do we suddenly get more people in powerful positions to embrace the notion of whatever religion you choose? How do
Yeah.
we do that?
Well, and I think so. A really quick history for everyone is that in the 1960s, I think it was 64, Madeline Murray O'Hair won a court case to keep the Ten Commandments and prayer out of school. So she was upset because her like fifth grader son was being made to sit through a prayer at public school. So she took it to court, won, and she set up the Communists of America office in Texas. And it's very interesting all the history that happened to her. She has a very strange outcome of her life that your readers might be interested in. But the point I'm making is that so from the 60s to the present, our position has been you can't really even mention religion unless you're teaching about it. But you can't suggest it's good. You can't suggest that students should do it because of these cases in the 60s. Now, what's interesting is when I meet colleagues from Europe, other professors from Europe, they'll tell me, Professor Anderson, it's very fascinating because you Americans, you know nothing about religion, but you're all mostly Christian. You all say you're Christians, but you don't know anything about it. If we were to ask, if we do a man on the street like Leno used to do, he did this before. I saw one where he asked them name the four gospels, and they didn't know it, right? But in Europe, they'll tell me we're mostly atheists, but we know all about your religion because we teach it K through 12. Whereas you're not allowed to. So our students know the Bible. They can quote the Bible to you. They just don't believe it's true. And so it's this interesting flip that I don't think Americans realize that, but Europeans know about the Bible and our K through 12 doesn't. And that's weird.
Well, how would we get that into that without change? So whenever I talk about changing the K through 12 curriculum, I get the basic answers. One is the teachers union is the most powerful
Yeah,
union
right.
either in the country or the world. It doesn't, but the world isn't is circumstantial at this point, but in the country it is the most powerful union. So I've always said, what about online after school curriculum and even make it incentive based. Instead of playing video games, watch these courses, produce some kind of assignment, somehow get an incentive out of it. But
Yeah.
I don't know a because like you said, they don't know anything about religion, and
Yeah.
suddenly we're making it either bad or good, either you're left or right, either red or blue.
Yeah.
And then suddenly if and I don't understand. I don't agree with that logic. We should know more about religion. We should be
Well,
teaching more about religion.
yeah. So, I mean, I think you're right that, unions can do wonderful things in protecting workers and providing them with rights and good pay, good hours, but they can also be co opted like anything else. They can be taken over by an ideology that drives one purpose, which is now no longer really what the union was started for. And so I think in this case, we would need to look into what is the ideology behind the leaders of the unions. And it kind of taps into a little project I have about us professors also, because I think us professors at state universities, public universities, especially that take federal money, part of what we should do is essentially have the equivalent of a nutrition guide. So when you buy food, the manufacturer says, here's what's in the food. And you can look and see, and you can say, you can decide for yourself, I think this might be carcinogenic. I'm not going to buy that food. We should do that with ideologies. So when you go to when the parents take a campus tour, they're told all the sunny sides. Oh, here's where we have great debates and here's where we read the great books. But when you get into the classes, what the truth is you have a hard push for very far left ideologies, especially in the humanities, which is my field, history, literature, philosophy. And so we should have on our web pages, our faculty bios, here's the ideological ingredients, so to speak, of this professor. This professor believes the following things, not as a shaming thing, because the professor should be proud of what they believe, but as a way for students and parents to say, oh, okay, wait a minute, Professor Owen Anderson, he's a Christian, and that might affect how he teaches. So I'm gonna take a different class, or oh, he's a Christian, I want to take that class, and that's very rare. I'm using me as an example, but 97%, a recent poll at ASU, 97% of professors are left or far left. You don't get that. That's their
Right.
self-identity. You don't get that from fair hiring. You would have something closer to the population, which is almost 50-50 between
50-50, right. Or
97%. We would not accept that in any other field. If you found out 97% of some field was white men, that would be a national debate. But 97% of professors self-identify as left or far left. So I think that'd be what you're getting at. I'm saying is the same for professors and for union bosses. Let's have it out there. Let's have the information be public. The union bosses are essentially teaching communist rhetoric. Let's just put that and say they can own it and say, yeah, that's what I do.
well, how about if that first of all, my first question is there a reason for that 97%? Is there less applicants that are I mean, I don't know the answer. I'm asking
Yeah.
the question. I'm not
Well, I can
posing
tell
the
you their
answer.
answer. Smart people
Yes.
are liberals.
But
Now,
okay,
let me
so
ask you, will we accept that answer about anything else? This group is not this employee is 97% white men because they're smarter. We would say no, no, no. Wait,
absolutely
hold on.
not. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's their answer is we're smarter. But I think a fair-minded sociologist would find self-selection mechanisms that are operating. There's reasons why people who are more conservative might go into private law and people who are more liberal go into public law. And those have to do with personality factors, family of origin factors, upbringing factors. And so I notice a lot of this when I'm around other professors. I notice that there's certain personality traits that professors share, and it kind of moves them to it. For example, we know what a teacher's pet is, a person in school who their identity is based around being told, oh, you're so smart, you're such a great student. And people grow up and that's what they thrive on. They want to be told they're smart and they're such a good student. And so they go into fields where that's their reward. Whereas in public law, your reward is a huge paycheck, but lots of stress, right?
Huh.
So I think there's things like that. That's just one example. There's things like that I think would explain so that when you get to the hiring field, in philosophy, it's something like 200 applicants for every one tenure track job was what I have. 200 applicants. Now, there's got to be conservatives in that list. But let's even grant it's still like 150 liberals and 50 conservatives. What the liberals tell us we have to do in those cases is give the minority position a leg up. So if there's only 50 applicants that are conservative, then we weigh them heavier to make it more balanced. except for this is the only job in America where they say we don't need to do that. And then I've also been on hiring committees, and I've seen the questions asked. And even though ASU's policy is we don't use DEI to hire, it's been that way for about 5 years. Just within a year ago, I was on a committee, and the questions asked were things like, how will you increase diversity at our campus? Now that's a selection question. So you can say, oh, I didn't mean it that way, but who does that rule out? Who won't increase diversity on their definition? That person's ruled out. So there's all kinds of both like objective sociological reasons and then subjective ways that they can filter out who they don't want hired. But that's what stinks to me is the rank hypocrisy of it, because they're doing the very thing they say no one should do in hiring.
So how did you overcome? I mean, first of all, how did you overcome that? And then the second question is, do you still feel like the odd man out, or have you just ultimately fit into your group of colleagues?
Oh, so yeah, I'm probably the last conservative Christian hired for a tenure track philosophy job in the country. I know one other person in philosophy. I'm talking about. I know one other person who's at UT Austin, and he's older than me. So that's what I say. I'm probably the last one after me, and I was hired around 2000. The hiring mechanism just got cranked down to produce the kinds of outputs that we're seeing that lead to 97%. But how do I survive? Well, my job, a lot of people may not understand what a professor is. So a professor is a specific title for a research professor, a research university. In our culture, if someone teaches a night class at community college, we say, "Oh, that guy's a professor," but he's more as an instructor. But a professor, a tenure track professor, means you get sick, you're hired, and it's kind of like a medical profession. You get 6 years in your internship, like a medical student, where it's called untenured. You got to prove by publishing that you're worthy of being kept around. And at the end of those 6 years, you go up for tenure. And if you've proved it, you're given tenure. And tenure means that you have a research product that you can continue without any interference from the university. So it's to protect free enterprise, free research.
Research.
And then after that, there's one more advancement called full professor. And that's achieved if you show excellence in your research. So not everyone becomes a full professor, but you could be a tenured professor for your whole career. So the titles are you go from assistant to associate to full professor. Now that's kind of inside baseball. Most people's eyes are starting to glaze over. The only reason I mention it is that I got hired for a tenure track job, which is rare, and then I got tenure, and then I'm also a full professor. And so clearly I can cooperate with people I disagree with. Because if I'm just the guy out there who's always making everyone upset, I'm not going to do well. At the same time, though, I'm also pretty well known, especially now, as the outspoken conservative guy at ASU. And so I don't really I don't I feel it's my job as a philosopher following Socrates to object when the universities are imposing a tyrannical system on us. And in this case, that happens to be critical theory, communist, Marxist dialectic stuff. And so I'm pretty outspoken about that. And because of that, I'm not invited to the wine and cheese parties that my colleagues have.
Well, do you see the pendulum swinging the other way now? I'm being honest with you. I mean, we've heard a lot about it in the first 100 days of
Mm-hmm.
President Trump's presidency, that he did take a sledgehammer to what you just said is happening. I thought it was way too aggressive a sledgehammer, but it did happen. So do you see the pendulum now swinging the other way? Do you feel like there's going to be more Dr. Owen Andersons? Do you feel
Yeah.
like
What we have now, absolutely no, absolutely not. What's happened only is an external change to some funding models, which is reflected in some wording on university web pages. No professor was converted by any of Donald Trump's
no,
executive
but what
orders.
about new hires? What about
And
the
new
process?
hires, the ways that they can screen out unwanted applicants are not discoverable by the law. Like I said, how will you increase diversity on our campus? And so until you have professors who admit, yeah, we've been biased, we need to change that, you're not going to see a change. What they'll do is they'll change their words, they'll hunker down, they'll say, we got to sit this out for 4 years, and hopefully we'll have Governor Newsom president, and we can go back to what we're doing. That's all that's happening. So right now, there'll be no change on the horizon whatsoever until professors admit, and that's what I've called for. I've said professors need to publicly admit we created a discriminatory system and we need to change it.
But you're asking that 99% that prefer the that
Yeah,
prefer the
right. Yeah.
discriminatories. You're asking them to say
But
we've
all I'm
created.
asking is they apply their own philosophy. I'm not asking them to convert and become Christians. I'm just
Right,
asking
right.
them,
You're not saying you want special treatment, you want equal treatment. But you're
yeah,
again
right. Yeah.
asking the 99% that did want the special treatment to forgo the notion of special
Yeah.
treatment, acknowledge that they got special treatment, and then say it's the worst thing that ever happened.
Yeah,
That's a big ask.
if there, it is, but if their goal is a university that represents their community, that's one of their mottos. And so they don't want a university of just white men because the community is not just a bunch of white men. Understand, but the community is also not a bunch of Marxists, right? The community here in the Greater Phoenix area between Catholics, Protestants, Mormons, we're like 70% claiming to be Christians, but the university is 90%, 97% atheist. That doesn't represent the community either. So that goes to our conversation that we need to throw religion in the mix of diversity and
Absolutely, yeah.
representation.
So how can again these are the like when I throw out these long shot winded ideas, I realize they're long, but we then I say no one knows what tomorrow holds, but we all know who holds tomorrow.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
do we get this point across to young people? What about Dr. Owen Anderson starting, and I know this is a big task, but
Mm-hmm.
starting his own university with other professors similar mind and scope and comparing results? How would that work? Would that change
Well,
any minds?
well, no, I think that's exactly what's already happening across the country. So there'll be what's great about America is you get to try different things and see if they work. And so that's one thing I tell communist colleagues is the United States is the only place on earth where you're free to start a commune. Let's see how it goes. There's been hundreds of communes started in the history of America and along atheist communist ideas sometimes, and they all fail for the same reasons. But if you think you know something new, move to some I don't know, rural Oregon, buy some acreage, and start a commune. The reverse is not true. You can't do that in North Korea. You can't say, hey, I'm going to try a Christian experiment here in North Korea. So the United States is the best place to try your commune. So that's what I put out there is we're already doing that. So you've got Hillsdale. Every conservative parent wants their kid into Hillsdale, but they only have so many spots. So then you have in Florida, New College, public university, University of Florida, New College, which is attempting to do what you and I are talking about. And you have things popping up at places like UT Austin, at Princeton. Robert George started the James Madison program. And so you have those kinds of things happening. Now, for myself, because I've had colleagues ask me in a snarky way, but I've also had well-intentioned friends
Well, I
ask me,
wasn't being snarky when I
no, no,
said
not you at all. But I've had people say, why are you here? But I've also had friends say, oh, and you're always having to debate people. Why not go to a Christian university? Well, I just told you how many of us there are. Do we really
that.
want to lose one of maybe three tenured conservative philosophers? So as long as they'll have me, I'm playing by the rules. Then I think it's important that someone like me is on the inside of the largest university in the country, Arizona State.
Absolutely, we wouldn't. I don't think they want to lose you at all, and I don't think anybody would want. Like what you're saying when you think of the percentages, I don't think anybody would want you to go somewhere else.
Yeah,
But as a who, I don't even know how it would work from this. But as a board member, even if you created a K through
yeah,
12 school that had
yeah.
this philosophy, right? Or if you went
We've got
as
stuff like
far
that.
as
Yeah,
ideologically speaking, if you like a Hershey school, where again we go back to my biggest focus as kids timing out of college, you timing out of foster care. You take these 18-year-olds and you put them in a Hershey's University
yeah,
for the next 4 years of their life, and you build on that theme that
yeah,
you're talking about. But you don't leave your school; you create that school, and you
yeah.
stay on as a board member and an advisor, and
Yep,
you compare the results of what's happening now. Wouldn't that speak volumes for what
that'd be
could
great.
happen?
That'd be great. And that's one other school I didn't mention at ASU. So ASU does have a school of economic and political thought and leadership. And it was started about 10 years ago by our legislature, which is generally very conservative, right? So right now we're kind of on the razor's edge. We have a conservative majority, but really small. But it started the school at ASU because it said, look, we're going to give you, I don't know what the number was, $20 million ASU, because you don't have anything conservative. You need to start a school. And so it's a great little school within ASU. It's basically like a great book school that reads all the great political theorists, and then it sends the kids, the students to DC for internships. And it's a gold mine because it's state tuition, but you're getting great training, but it's small. because
Right.
once you're in that school, all the rest of the professors know, oh, you're in that school. So I encourage those kinds of things. My role as Socrates, I think, puts me a little bit outside of that, where I can be the guy who shows the discrimination, hypocrisy, so that students end up going over to that school. But at the same time, I'm sometimes hesitant to name some of the other things going on because I don't want them to get flack because of my being public outspoken. They still have to work together and get budgets passed and whatnot. But I think, in other words, what you're suggesting, people are trying those things, which is great.
I do suggest it, and I suggest it in a big way. And first of all, your role is significant, just like you said. That role of suggesting that they do what you suggest they do is important. But the other thing, when you throw out that $20 million figure, and it does, all $20 million will do is start a small school.
Mhm.
But here's my frustration: we just gave Argentina $40 billion, and that's under the leadership of Donald Trump. I'm not singling out presidents because it's happened under every president.
Yeah.
But when it comes to here,
Yeah.
where's the $40 billion swing the bat hard? If you lose it, you lose it. If it works, it's better for the next
Yeah.
100 years for America.
No,
But
I
we
think that's the
don't.
right question.
Yeah, I mean the $20 million. When you say that about a
That's
university,
nothing.
I've actually said to myself, I said, if we were to build this life skills university, Hershey University, for these kids timing out, and all it did was facilitate 1,800 kids a year, it would cost $1 billion. It would take a
Yep.
thousand acres.
Isn't that nuts? Yeah.
But why is $1 billion so outlandish? I mean, when we
Yep.
think, you sign a
Well,
piece
for
of
most of us, if we had 1 million, we'd be happy. So they were talking about
right,
20 million, but you and I know that's nothing
nothing. It's
for
not going to
state
come.
budgets. But then,
No.
yeah, once I mean, this is what Elon and Doge did, right? They exposed it, what is the State Department paying for? They're paying for LGBTQ Sesame Street episodes in Iraq. Like, well, why are we spending 2 billion on that when we could produce the school here that you're suggesting? And now some of our international spending, you and I aren't qualified to know what's going on, right? In other words, we want a military base in Argentina, so we have a presence in South America, so we give them some money. Okay, but the stuff Doge exposed is nothing like it's not military stuff at all. It's just leftist propaganda through the American State Department. And if we took all that money and we put it into schools like you're suggesting, yeah, that would be wonderful.
I would love to see that happen. When you bring up Doge, it brings up a significant point to me. When I think of Elon Musk, and there was this comparison, it's not me just thinking out loud, that how SpaceX does things versus how NASA does. NASA draws everything on paper for years. SpaceX was crashing planes and learning
Mm-hmm.
from the spaceship
Yeah.
crashes. Okay, so why did and I'm just saying this not again to single out a president, but why did Donald Trump give up on Elon Musk so fast? Let him crash. He crashed. The initial Doge wasn't what it was meant. It wasn't a $2 trillion savings. It was watered down to a trillion. I think in the end it was not. It wasn't
Yeah.
anywhere near that. Why not continue on that? No, let's understand Department of Government efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Let's
That's one
understand
of the
what's a
questions we all wonder. Yeah.
right, and
What
then
happened?
and
Because
then
they had that
what
big
is the
public
return
fight.
on investment?
Yeah.
When we look at Ukraine and we say they're fighting Russia with $4,000 drones and we're still building $60 million fighter jets,
Yeah.
why are we not looking at a government official? And when that question was easily answered, there's lawmakers that say we want those $60 million
Yep.
contracts in our warehouses here in Arizona or here
Yep.
in
Yep.
Florida. So you're going to have a tough time retracting all that. But when it comes to education, we could swing the bat hard. We could build those universities that Dr. Owen Anderson, this is how you should staff
Yeah.
it. That's
Yeah.
all. All you would have to be is on the board. Let me look at some resumes. Let me say, yeah, let me greenlight some
Yeah.
resumes.
I think you're right. That's a great plan. I do believe there's sentiment for that in the American voter, where we're saying, why aren't we helping us here? And that could go across lines, because what you and I are talking about is largely people think, well, that's the conservatives, but I hear people on the left asking the same questions about their programs. Now they might be in specific ideological programs, but those don't have to be Marxist dialectic in their focus. A lot of
No,
times they
no.
share the same concern you do about foster kids. How do we help foster kids? That's a universal concern. We want to help them grow. And so I think let's make that happen. That'd be wonderful, and bring that money here. But you touched on it. You touched on it with the teachers unions, and now you're touching on it with government officials. There's power and money involved, and so the American system only works if it's actually responsive to the people. If it's become an entrenched group, then what you really have is an oligarchy or aristocracy. It's no longer, the voting is an illusion,
The
and you're
voting
just
is an
replacing
illusion, very much so.
one party, a uniparty. And so I think that's part of the revolution going on right now. And the answer to the next 50 years, will it be different, is in this. Will we actually be able to replace the uniparty and say we want America to be treated first, or will we still be stuck with these entrenched interests?
Well, you realize, if you go to that philosophy, we want America to be the things that will be learned from that action will spread across the
Yeah.
world. People will share those best practices.
Yep.
So by actually engaging in that, not necessarily, the $40 billion to Argentina, that probably will get squandered. That probably will get soaked
Well,
up by it because there's
the fraud's terrible.
frauds
The
there
number
over
of,
there is
when you look at
awful.
like a UN projects, Prager U just had a video. I think it was about Nigeria, and none of the money from the UN, basically like 95% of it, just makes people rich. Doesn't get to the people who need the money.
No, it's gotten bad. I've worked with organizations where they bring food to refugees and they say the only way to slip past the goalie is we got to give half the bounty to the warlords. Okay, half, but the other half goes to profiteering from the organization. So the
Mm-hmm.
poor, the people suffering from what's going on, get nothing. That's not the ideal situation either. So, and that's a lot of what's happening now here. And yes, they generally say the people that are crazy enough to think that they could change the world are the ones that do. And that's, me and you. And I'm always interviewing people and listening to these incredible ideas, and they're just
Yeah.
drowned out. They're just
Yeah.
drowned out by politicians who are profiteering in the
Well,
guise of
so I
public
think
office.
what happens though is that the people you're describing, they have tenacity and grit. And so even though our ideas might be drowned out in one sense, you and I will still make things happen. So the only difference is that we're not going to have that 1,000-acre campus, but I'm sure you're out there helping foster kids, and I'm doing my best to help out at ASU and in our larger Phoenix community. So I think that's the difference is we don't require government money. It would be great, but we're not going to give up either. And I think that's wonderful. What's wonderful, that's the American work ethic. That's the true American dream. Not that I can get myself rich, but the American dream is I can do something that improves the world. And I have the freedom to do that without the constraints of preconceived notions of what it should look like. And hopefully that, I mean, I see that in you, I see that in me. And so the people you interview, I better like that also.
Yeah, absolutely. I do see that. Like you said, that the 1,000 acres and the $1 billion campus is metaphorically speaking, but it is happening. It is. In my own community, we're seeing smaller schools being built in Groveland, Florida, where kids are riding their bikes to school rather than because the buses are kind of a very expensive option.
Yeah.
So they're building more smaller community-based schools. It's happening. But
But the buses were, of course, a social project in response to Brown versus the Board of Education to desegregate schools. Because then, and still to some extent today, people live in segregated neighborhoods. Then it may have been officially, now it might be unintentional or unofficial. But the buses were made so that you would bus students from where they're at to a school to make the school segregated. And so what you're pointing out is, and it was still true then, most people live within a bike ride of their school. But
right.
that doesn't fit this. And I'm not commenting on the past. Was that the right decision in the 50s? I'm
No.
just talking about today. Why do we need that today, though?
But just like you said, when you think about, so if you go on SupremeCourt.org, you listen to oral arguments. There was a Mahmoud versus Taylor, which was essentially kids absolutely have to sit in the classroom and listen to the reading of Little Johnny Has Two Daddies. I
Yeah,
don't know the book's name, but
sure, yeah.
I'm just spitballing, right? And you could even hear the liberal justices, especially Justice Keegan, saying, like what in the world? So they can't opt out of listening to this book, but they can opt out of choir when it's singing a certain religious song. So
Mhm.
the opt out is going to create this juggernaut of problems when it comes to listening to the reading of this book, but not
Not
necessarily
for
the
that, yeah.
choir problems, right?
Well, I just mentioned to you the case with Madeline Murray O'Hare in the 60s. I don't want my kid to have to listen to the teacher praying. The teacher says, the kids, you don't have to pray, kids. I'm going to pray for the class myself. So your kid already has the freedom not to pray. But it's offensive to even be in the room where the public school teacher's praying. But you've got to sit through the LGBTQ presentation. You have to.
Well, they
Well,
lost the
why?
case.
What's the difference? Well, the first one, prayer is fake, and this one's the real important stuff. And so this is something I tell my students. Everybody's religious. We have a myth that there's some religious people and some not religious people. Everybody's religious. The question isn't if you're religious. The question is, what is your religion? And so you've got this religion pressing towards the goal, and they have their own rituals, they have their own liturgies. They don't read the Nicene Creed, they read the LGBTQ creed. But it's the same thing. So if we're going to be serious about keeping religion out of schools, we got to be universally serious. But what I think has been proven is you can't keep religion out of schools. The question isn't, do we keep it out? The question is, well, which religion rules the school? And right now it's that far left LGBTQ plus philosophy. They're in charge of all of the school.
So really, this has been incredible. I know you're busy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wrap it up with this. I'm just gonna ask this one question. Do you see the pendulum swinging in the other direction? I have to just ask that
Yeah.
question. Do you remain hopeful?
I am. I'm an optimist in general because I believe God is good and God's in charge. But in terms of our lifetime, I do see it swinging. But I'm keeping an eye on it to see, is it merely a secular swinging, which is this. I'll define that. A secular swinging means there's a lot of benefits to religion. Religion gives you law and order. And if you're going to have businesses, businesses want law and order. They want to live and do work in countries where they can be guaranteed not to be stolen from, and they can go to court if they need to. So you can use religion for purposes that have nothing to do with God or Christ. And so I'm keeping an eye on it to see. I don't want to see this co-opted. I'm the TPUSA faculty representative. I'm the faculty who helps run the TPUSA clubs at ASU, and the groundswell of religion is just amazing. We had an event at ASU held in ASU's basketball stadium, so it was about 3/4 filled, about 10,000 people. The only part that wasn't filled was the one right behind the stage because no one could see it. So everyone's in front and around 10,000 people. And the next meeting we had, the next student meeting, it had 100 people. The whole room was filled. Plus, I think it was 300 on Zoom. And I listened to the comments. So this is about 5 days after the memorial for Charlie Kirk. And the students said, more than one of them, I was so happy that this was not a Republican thing. It was a Christian thing. And these are from Republican students. So they don't not oppose Republican, but they said, I heard the word Republican one time. I heard Jesus all night. And that's what I wanted. And I think if that's what we're seeing, then we've got some good times ahead. But if it turns into people using religion to get other goals, then it won't be realistic. And the opponents of Christianity will point it out. They'll say this isn't authentic. So I'm very hopeful, and I'm hopeful that it's going to be a good transition. But there's a lot of work ahead too, because like I said, 97% of faculty, they're not giving up their tenure track jobs. They're not even admitting they're wrong. They're just waiting out Trump. They're just waiting for Newsom. That'll save them.
Well, I said the other day, I said, I'm seeing the three guys who are buffing their chests out from the Democratic side. It's Newsom, it was John Ossoff, and it was Josh Shapiro, and I'm like, we really need something else. We really
Yeah,
need because so I wouldn't necessarily concern myself with just Gavin Newsom, who's
sure.
his particular spiel is you don't build a $200 million ballroom and then move out of your house. He
Yeah.
I
Well, my colleagues like him because he's using Trump humor against Trump. I don't think it's been very successful. I don't think it sticks, but they think, oh, good, someone's finally shown Trump that they don't realize, no, that's still Trump winning. He's moved the dialogue to his
Right,
thing.
right. You're still paying too much attention
Yeah,
to him, which is
yeah,
actually what I've said often. And I've even said there was a thing called the Lincoln Project with a limited budget. Now you've got Jimmy Kimmel every night
yeah,
talking Trump, which is basically the Lincoln Project on steroids.
yeah,
But still, in all, let's focus on real issues, not
mm,
sound bites of Trump,
yeah,
And I've made the argument, I remember one time Trump came out of a meeting, he said, I just met with the president of the Virgin Islands, and even his staff said, you met with the governor, you're the president. But they spent so much time on the little mistake he made. It's like, let's talk about the
yeah,
big
yeah,
picture.
yeah.
Really, enough of the little stuff. But
I
this
remember
has
they did
been
that a little bit with George W. Bush. They painted him as a kind of a dullard, and they would hyper focus on things he would say, missteps in his speech. But clearly, he's also a super intelligent person. But it was just an interesting way for liberals in the universities to say he's dumb. But then with Obama years, not he would make mistakes. Not one was ever mentioned.
no,
And
no,
then
no.
back to Trump, everyone he says is mentioned.
I think you just used the term hyper focus. It's just
Mhm.
let's stay on topic. Enough about
Yeah,
the silly little mistakes.
yeah.
Let's stay on topic, and that's
Well,
what
that's
we
one
just
thing I've
did.
I've tried to figure out TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, because the people I work with have always been against conservative presidents. They didn't like Reagan, they didn't like George W. Bush, but Trump was a whole different factor. And I think what it is the big story, long story short, is with Obama, they believed American history had finally corrected itself. They were at the apex of the golden age. We'd elected an African American president. All of our evils of the past were finally resolved. And then the next president isn't just another member of the Uniparty. You know, they would have held their nose about a Republican, but it wasn't just that. It was Donald Trump who comes in. He's been talking about fake birth certificates and you know, Muslims are rejoicing at 9/11. He's talking about all that stuff. He's talking about how he's going to end Obamacare, their big thing. And so I think that just like broke their minds, where the reverse was so dramatic that
Right.
they just can't handle it.
The wrecking ball, I call him.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that you and I know he's using a fighting strategy. You can read the Five Rings. You can read Sun Tzu, Art of War. He's putting his opponents off balance, but they fall for it every time. And if you're in the ring, it's called rope a dope. In politics, you've got them on their back heels the whole time, and they never catch on. I mean, one or two times, okay, he caught me by surprise. Every single time he'll say something like, maybe I could be a third term president. That's all we talk about for 2 weeks. And the
Right.
one I love, because conservatives fell for this one too. He says, you know, I may not make it into heaven. I'm not sure I've done enough stuff. For the next 2 weeks, all we talked about was soteriology and salvation. Every conservative pastor is posting online about, hey, that's not how you get to heaven. Here's how you get to heaven. He altered the entire national conversation for 2 weeks by just saying one comment, I might not get to heaven. And people don't realize, like, yeah, he's studied these things. He's doing this on purpose. You got to pay attention to that.
I try to explain that. And when you say Sun Tzu, the art of war, never interrupt your enemy when they're making mistakes.
Right. Yep.
He's never going to interrupt his enemy when they're making mistakes. He's going to create the opportunity for them to make more mistakes.
Well,
And no matter,
I saw an article today, which I'm not 100% sure is true, but it's the same thing I thought 5 months ago when he said there's a Epstein files are a nothing. There's nothing in them. I thought to myself, okay, this is Trump. He's trapping his enemies, isn't he? And so for 5 months, we have to see the Epstein files. The Epstein files are the most important thing on earth. I think he just trapped the Democrats because guess who's going to be in the Epstein files?
well, I've always said they're all in it. And that's a whole
Yeah.
nother topic. I've
Well,
said
we got
basically,
emails now with Jeffrey Epstein saying, I want to get Trump fired. He's not a buddy with Jeffrey Epstein, right? So I'm not sure
it,
it'll be true. We'll see, but it might be another one of his master plans of how to trap the enemies.
I don't know what it is, but the Epstein files frustrates me the most because I always say, look, before the Epstein files, there was the Catholic Church, there was the Boy Scouts, there was, the Sandusky thing. Let's talk about human trafficking. Let's
Yeah,
stop
yeah,
making these pedigrees. Let's
yeah,
talk about the issue of protecting and educating our children how to avoid human trafficking.
yeah.
Stop with the one laser,
Yeah, like the whole thing needs to be addressed,
the
which has
whole
big
thing.
problems, right?
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
and I
And
think
this is
the name Epstein list is misleading to the populace because they think there's like a list of 100 names, just a list,
right, like a Rolodex.
and that doesn't exist. There's 70,000 emails.
I think
You
it's
got to
more
get through.
like a
Yeah,
lot. I don't know what it is, but it's just, and who knows what. When we keep getting into this, it's like you said. I really am not sure he's not doing this deliberately. I don't have the answer, but I'm
yeah,
not sure about it.
yeah. It might be. That's why I don't know for sure either. But it would not surprise me if he just corralled them into a huge mistake.
Like, yeah, absolutely. Like, that Art of War book. Don't interrupt your enemies when they're making huge mistakes, because
Yeah.
and this has been incredible, Doctor
Oh
Owen.
yeah.
Really want to stay in touch. I'm really
I hope
grateful
we
because
do.
I know how busy you are being doing all the things you do, and you took the time to talk to me. And that
I
makes me
love it.
really happy to have this podcast because I've been getting some incredible interviews. You're one of the most significant, and
Well,
I
thank you.
really
Very kind of you. I loved it. It's really nice to talk to you too. And yeah, keep in touch. I'd love to talk to you anytime.
I will absolutely stay in touch. I mean, I've had great guests. I said you were one of the most. They were all significant because we're all
Sure.
building a consensus of how to move forward, and
Yeah.
that's what's
Well,
really going to be.
you can reach out like if you're on X, I'm just Doctor_O Anderson. I'll tell your audience too. I try to keep my social media consistent so you can find me easy. You'll see my picture, but also I use usually Dr. Owen Anderson. So I've got a web page, I've got an X, and you can DM me and we can talk directly about future
That
stuff.
would be great. Thank you. Thank you. I will stay in touch. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Thank you so much. I'll
Yeah, it's
talk
been
to you
great. Thank
soon.
you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.